Okay, let's begin. My name is Colin Campbell.
They don't know.
I'm a writer at Polygon. And we're here for 1,000 Voices Open Game Development. It is what it sounds like. A couple of things to sort out before we begin. If you've got noisy devices, please turn them down or off. Also, you will get an email at some point asking you for your opinions about this panel. Hopefully you'll fill it in. You've probably heard this stuff already a few times if you've been at GDC. So we've got an excellent panel today to talk about this subject. There has been one change to the program. Adrian Goya, who is the guy from Kerbal Space Program, is not able to make it. Ryan Clark, founder of Brace Yourself Games, has kindly agreed to help out.
Yay.
So before we get started, I'm going to ask these guys to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Chris on the end there.
I'm Chris Evelyn. I'm creative director at Obsidian Entertainment, and we did a beta backer release for Pillars of Eternity, which is coming out at the end of March. And that's actually our first experience with showcasing one of our products early on to the public, and it's actually been a huge beneficial thing for our company. But you know what? I'm going to let Soren introduce himself now. Soren.
Okay. I'm Soren Johnson. I'm the founder of Mohawk Games, and we have a game that we just put up on Early Access about 3 weeks ago called Offworld Trading Company, which is an economic RTS.
I'm Ryan Clark. I'm the creator of Crypt of the Necrodancer, which is on Steam Early Access right now. And we actually also did a kind of mini early access before that with pre-releases. We cut off the pre-releases and gave the game to everybody, so we've got a few different experiences with giving people the game early.
I'm Jamie Chang. I founded Clay Entertainment, and we've been making games for some time. We've launched 3 different early access games, and one of them went out of early access, which is Don't Starve. It was also the very first early access game, and before that, it was on the Chrome Web Store, which most people don't know about, which was kind of the point.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. So what we're going to try and find out from these guys today is their experiences with early access, with putting games out to the public, asking them to invest in those games, and also asking them to contribute to the development process with information, with play patterns, and all that stuff. And so I'm going to ask each of you now to just give us a 5-minute breakdown on your recent experiences and tell us the kind of big takeaway that you've got from this lesson, avoiding obvious stuff like, listen to your consumer. Can I begin?
Well, okay, that's a very good question. Okay, so the big takeaways were that we discovered that it was the best thing to do to generally release a new build either once or twice a month, but you shouldn't do it if it's going to put a large drain on the resources of the development team. And also, you should be cognizant of the fact that when you're doing these, once or twice a month releases, you generally should have something important in the feature set that's been improved that's going to make it worthwhile for the players to get excited about and play the game, like a new class or a new area got opened up or something that's actually going to excite them. Otherwise, a bunch of little patch fixes actually aren't quite as worthwhile. Also, one other issue we had was that it was a little difficult to get a good consolidated area to provide a list of changes to the player, because we discovered that not everyone would read like a sticky forum post, for example, listing all the changes, and even then you had to sort of use some semantic wizardry to communicate in general what those changes were without flooding the player with too much information. So we were actually up until this date, we're still looking for new ways to better communicate the changes to the player, and we still haven't solved that particular issue yet. But from a design standpoint, I think that the beta release for Eternity ended up being a hugely positive thing for the game. I often find that having design discussions internally can be difficult, but when 200 people who have played the build say that they don't like a particular system or the way it's implemented, suddenly you have a lot more backing for why something should be changed, and it's an outside perspective that's relatively unbiased once it's 200 people. So that's some of the big takeaways that we got for Pillars.
Thanks. Soren?
So we're fairly new to Steam Early Access, but we actually started selling our game last summer just through our website. And we were actually asking for a lot for that game at that point. We were charging $80 for the game, and we were giving away 2 keys. But we were charging that basically because we wanted a really dedicated audience. These are the people who are most excited about getting our game, and the ones who knew that they'd be playing a very early prototype, and were just really happy to be involved in the process. And that went really well. And then when we went on to Steam, it was a real it was an order of magnitude level difference in the number of players, and that's been really cool. It's been great to have a larger group of people and a lot more people talking about the game. But it's also clear to me that the people who buy a game on Steam Early Access are very different from the type of people who would go to your own company's website, seek out the game that you're trying to sell, and want to be part of that process. There is sort of, I think, a little bit issue of that. When someone loads up Steam, and they see your game there, and you see the price, and you see a buy button, and you see user reviews, and you see screenshots, and you see videos. It may be labeled early access, but for a lot of people, that doesn't really sink in. So I think you really have to go out of your way to emphasize to people that this is an early access game. It is something different. So we have. When you load up the game, we have an update screen. They'll tell you what has changed since the last time you got a patch, or the last time you played the game. We try to remind the players that this is a process that they're going on, and we have beyond that, like in the description on our Steam page, we also sort of go out of the way to emphasize to people that we're a project that is fully funded, right? That we had the amount of money we needed to make the game and to release it in about a year. We actually have quite a ways to go, but we're purely going to early access because we want to learn about our game. We want to find out if our our assumptions about our design ideas are correct or not.
Ryan.
2 things we learned. I think the first was obvious fairly quickly, that the game that we thought we had and that the way that we thought people were going to play it was actually quite different than what actually occurred. People ended up speedrunning Crypt of the Necrodancer a heck of a lot, and that's pretty much all they do online now. There's races that they've set up. They have leagues and things. People in Japan get together and do all kinds of speedrunning races and stuff. And so from that point on, everything that I added to the game, I made sure that it wasn't going to break the speedrunning stuff, and we actually removed some features that were harming speedrunning or making it too luck dependent. Like we had a scroll called the teal scroll that when you used it, it would drop you down a level. So if somebody found that, it would save them immediately about 30 seconds or a minute or something like that. And so if the person they were racing against didn't find that, they would have a massive disadvantage. So we started balancing things with that in mind, because we saw that's what they were doing. But at the same time, I noticed that the game was becoming a bit more obtuse for new players, because we were spending a lot of time focusing on these people who were just super hardcore about it, played for hundreds of hours, and race it, and we were neglecting the lower end. We were putting in more complex items that were more difficult for new players to understand. So yeah, I think pay attention to those loud people who are doing cool stuff with your game, but also make sure that you are thinking about the quieter ones who might only have played it for an hour and given up or something. They might not even say anything. So keep both of those in mind. And the other thing is, I'm not sure exactly what I expected going into it, but for the first few months or so, when we released an update that we thought was a big update with lots of new content, new characters, and things like that to play, we didn't really see much of a bump either in sales or in active users, daily active users, and that kept going on until about 7 months into the early access process. And now we actually do, when we launch a big update, we do see a reasonable sized bump. And actually, I was talking with you about this a couple months ago, that we hadn't, and now just recently we have finally. And my theory is that we're seeing it now because when you first start selling, your sales curve is still on the way down, and that bump, it's actually there, but it's smaller than the number of new users you're acquiring. And we had a spike in September because we were a daily deal. We had a spike in October because that's when Japan found out about the game, and also the Halloween sale, and then Thanksgiving sale, and then Christmas sale. So all these things were spiking, and we weren't getting back to our baseline ever. But now there hasn't been a sale on Steam for quite a while, And we noticed that when we put out an update, we do get an increase in sales, an increase in users. And so I think if your game is the type of game that has high retention, you will eventually start to grow in your audience. And now our baseline is actually climbing a bit each time we update. And I think that's kind of what I noticed watching Nuclear Throne. They seem to be growing over time, and now I think they're actually selling quite a bit more than we are, because they consistently put out good updates every week and get decent spikes out of it. So I think it takes a fair amount of time, but you can eventually start to see things grow just due to your updates.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's just new.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was going to say the same thing, that I never saw a spike. Apparently, I'm doing it wrong. And it feels like the more we do it, I mean, we've done 3 games. I work with Ryan on his one as well a little bit. We share information, and the more I do it, the more I'm like, I don't know what the hell is going on, basically. But from my standpoint, it's being clear about what we want to get out of early access and what is it that we really want to do. So, and we see all these different stories of how different people do it. When Don't Starve came out, we were actually selling it for much cheaper. So we sold it for $7. Well, actually, we sold it for free at first. It was literally just free. If you found it on Chrome Web Store, it was free, and then we gave you a Steam key later. So it was literally, if you found it, you got it for free. And then after a while, we're like, oh, well, let's charge $7 for 2 copies, which is a bit different than $80 for 2 copies. And then $11, and then no, actually I think it was like $9 and then $11. And the reason that we did that was because we felt like our main problem was that people didn't know about our game, and we felt confident that we had a really good game that people wanted to play if only people knew about it. And so we priced it such that it would spread over time. And I think that was a big portion of our success. Of course, I can never A/B test it, so I can never find out if we would have done better if we priced it at $90 or $100. We just don't know. But I do believe that, and that's always been our strategy for Don't Starve, is, hey, more players means more players, and we just keep pushing that. And then for Invisible Ink, we felt, which is a strategy game that we're releasing, and it'll be done in a couple months. We put it out on our website first as an alpha because we really wanted just to get the hardcore people, very similar to Soren. But again, we priced it low. We also put a high priority on making sure that people feel like they got their money's worth. So we didn't want people to pay more money for our broken, shitty game. We wanted them to pay less money for our broken game and thank them for coming in early and taking a chance with us. And actually, my opinion is that we did it too early, and that our early access was also a little bit too early in the sense that our ramp was way too high. It was very hard to get into that game. And this was not a lesson that we learned from Don't Starve, because Don't Starve is a very easy to get into game. So that wasn't something that we experienced before. But Invisible Ink is a very complex game, and it requires a lot of our work to smooth it out, which is very similar to one of our other games, Mark of the Ninja. At first, that game was very, very hard to get into, and it just took months and months and months of smoothing it out. So hopefully when it comes out, it is smooth. I believe it is, but I can't prove it. Maybe I should early access that. I don't think so, actually. I don't think I should early access that. So we've had a wide variety of experiences. And one other really interesting thing, very much similar to Ryan, is that we found the way that people experience our game vastly changed the way that we approach the game, especially for Don't Starve, less so for Invisible Ink. But for Don't Starve, we thought it's a very different kind of game. It's a very brutal kind of game because you can play for a very long time, then we kill you and you have to start all over again. So we thought that people would just play for up to about 8 to 15 days, maybe max. Each day takes about 8 minutes. So even 2 hours in, we kill you, you start all over. That seems like a long time. But very shortly after we went into early access, people were playing 100 days, 200 days. And so we realized that we actually need content in those time periods. We need much more content to keep it going. We didn't actually end up building much more than about 100 days content, because that's still, 800 minutes of playing in one session. So we felt like, we're good now. You can do you can play around in the world that you've accomplished. So anyway.
Jamie, when you put a game out on early access and you're not happy with many of the aspects of it, how do you communicate that to the players without spoiling the information that you want to get back from them?
So the way that we communicate with the audience, first of all, most of the audience, only 5% of your audience is even listening to what you're saying at all anyway. So it doesn't, unless it starts leaking out into your reviews and unless it starts becoming like the top thread on your forums, most of the time people don't even hear it, right? But from our perspective, we want to nurture, our biggest fans. I don't want to call them hardcore because they're not necessarily hardcore. Sometimes they just love what you're doing, and they're not playing a lot, but they might be writing fan fiction, they might be drawing, they might be doing other things, and they're not actually just a hardcore player. And the way that we communicate with them is, I try to talk about the goals that we're trying to achieve. So these are the kinds of feelings that I'm trying to do in the game, in the design, rather than these are the things that we're about to do. Right? And that way, when the feedback I get is, oh, well, these things, these other parts of the game are pushing me away from that feeling. For example, the Don't Starve is about, freedom and doing what you want. And one of the things that we had early on is a mechanism for a metagame where you ground items into a science machine, and that gave you research points. And the research points unlocked new recipes, and that was the way to, that was our way to engage people. Even if you lost, at least you got some research points, right? But what that did was it created play sessions where people, all they would do is grind research points, because that's what they wanted, right? And now suddenly we changed the game that's their game now, and that's not in the spirit of what we wanted the game to be, which was this openness. So when we removed the research points, we discussed this feeling that we wanted people to get. And I believe that that's what made it work for everybody.
Very interesting, thank you. Soren, your game came out quite recently on early access. How much of the information that you're getting back is hard data? And how much of it is kind of answering questions that you've already asked yourself, as opposed to, well, this is surprising, this is something that we weren't expecting?
I think we're seeing a lot of surprising stuff. We have some data in the sense that we're using sort of the Steam stat system to just keep track of, basic things like the wins and losses for each of the different headquarter types, and how many of the different types of buildings are created, and which patents are researched. And I'm not really specifically going to tune the game based off of that information, but what that does do for me is if some concepts start emerging on the forums that this is overpowered, or this never gets used, I'm gonna check that against the stats for sure. I think more what we've learned that's maybe a bit of a surprise is what people's assumptions are coming into the game. We have kind of a unique game in that it fits the format of an RTS. It's like 30 minutes long. You can play with up to 8 people. It's really competitive. So it has that aspect, but there's no units, there's no combat. It's a purely economic game, and I think what we've seen is that a lot of the people who come in from an RTS background, they are generally respond to the game really well because it fits the type of game, the sort of the format they're used to playing. But on the other end, there's a lot of people who are coming in who like games like the Anno series or Railroad Tycoon or SimCity, and they're kind of really shocked that they're expecting this game to go on for 4 or 5 hours, and suddenly 30 minutes later the game is over, and it's a big surprise for them. And we can't necessarily change the game to adapt to that. I mean, at that point we have to make a choice, right? Like, are we going to commit to a specific audience, or what do we think about these type of people? Are they, do they need to get over some of their assumptions, or are we going to give them more time, or do we need to sort of adapt the game to, their feelings? So what we can do now is we can just do some experiments. So we had a patch yesterday where we introduced a new victory condition where, the basic system in the game is there's a stock market where you're buying up your competitors, and when you sort of launch a hostile takeover against another company, bang, they're out of the game. They've lost, you get all their stuff. That's how you get to the end of the game. Eventually, everyone gets spot out except for one player. So we're going to try something completely different. There's a new mode where the game lasts a certain period of time, about half an hour, and it's just simply a race to see who has the highest stock price at the end. And that leads to a very different feel, and I think that's fine. I think it's great to be able to take the same game system and bend it in different ways. The question is this solution actually going to make some of those people happy, or are we still off base with that as the solution, or is it just this is not a game for someone who is really ultimately just looking for a lengthy, epic, multi-hour experience?
Chris, your game is coming out very soon.
End of March.
You're working with a world that's got a lot of lore as well as a lot of history in the real world.
Yes, it's got a lot of lore, actually. A lot of lore. Oh my God, there's so many exhausting nodes to go through. I'm sorry, go on, Colin.
That's right. I'm going to take a guess and suggest that a lot of your backers would have had strong opinions about the game and would have felt a desire to shape it in some way. Can you talk about how you process and filter that kind of information?
Yeah, and actually that's a good question. That actually ended up being a problem because with our backer release, there's actually a lot that we didn't want to share about the story and the world from a lore perspective because we wanted to keep certain twists and turns of the storyline intact. We did do a number of backer updates that said, hey, here's the pantheon of the world. Here's how, different spell mechanics work for the different classes. Here's why certain classes are the way they are. Here's why paladins could uphold, certain beliefs and faiths rather than a specific deity. We were able to put all that out there and get feedback on the forums through that, but we were aware that there was a large chunk of the actual story and narrative in the release that we actually weren't sharing with people. And I think that can be a little bit scary, but I think a lot of the backers trust us to deliver on that, so I'm not too worried about it.
What about the problem for you now that the game is coming out of generating public excitement? In the old days, a game came out, there was a lot of marketing. What do you do when a game has sort of been around for a while and you don't have that oomph moment?
Well, actually, I asked our marketing coordinator and also our associates at Paradox about that, and their feeling was it's part of their job to set up events that generate hype, like reveal new information, because not all of the game has been revealed up to this point. It's only stuff that the backers have been able to sample. It's not everything. And it's their job to sort of set up, okay, here's what's cool about this. Like, here's the developers that are going to be going on the road show. Like, for example, me and Tim Kane and Josh Sawyer and Adam Bernicke, we're actually going to be going to PAX East here probably in about 2 or 3 hours to do like a big presentation there to showcase the game and go, hey, you know what, here's some really cool sample areas in Eternity. Here's an overview of all the companions, which we haven't really talked a lot about up until this point. Here's what's cool about them. Here's some, new audio strings that, you wouldn't have seen, earlier on. And events like that can generate hype and still build excitement for the game.
Ryan, you were talking about different players having different expectations of the game. How do you deal with displeasure and even anger amongst your, I guess, customers?
Yeah, and we've definitely had some. Like I said, there are those people who just want to speedrun the game, and they want us to focus entirely on putting out speedrunning features. And if we put out features that aren't so much for speedrunners or more for the newer players, then they say, well, if you just changed it like this, then it would be perfect for us. I'm like, well, but then it would seriously confuse other folks. So there's definitely been a few instances of conflict there, but I found that as long as we explain why we're doing it, they've mostly been pretty reasonable. I think I've been fortunate that our game, because it's a roguelike game and a rhythm game, our community is like comprised of people who really love both and are really into the game. So it's not a very broad community, but it's like people who are, this is the game for them. They're like, you made this just for me. So I think we have a super friendly group. So yeah, there hasn't been a heck of a lot of conflict, thankfully.
You do have a 99% approval rating on your Steam store.
Pretty good. The third highest currently rated reviewed game on Steam.
You're probably the wrong person to ask that question. And Jamie, I'll ask you, what about how do you deal with the community? Because you're a game developer and community management is perhaps a new skill.
Actually, when we were starting to build Don't Starve, we thought long and hard about what that meant to us, because before that we were working with publishers for many years, and at that point, what I was talking to with one of my partners is, we're no longer just a developer, we're self-publishing, which means that we need to be a publishing department. Like, we need to be a good publisher. It doesn't mean that we have to have that department specifically, but we need to do all those functions. And so we hired a community manager before a community even existed in our forums. We started the forums again. I had forums way back when we made Eats 10 years ago, and they just kind of like languished and died. And frankly, I believe that a forum that's not well maintained is basically an advertisement for how bad your company is.
Yep.
Right? Because that's where everyone goes to complain. And so if anybody goes there, all they see is complaints, and they're like, "Whoa, this is terrible," right? And so while it was still good, we shut it down. That's basically how it was. And then when we did Don't Starve, we started it up again, and we really started thinking about, how do we message this stuff? So, we did things like on the front page of the game, it would say the next update coming in, 13 days, right? And then when it was fresh, it was like fresh meat, and you would click it, and you would see all the details, and it would be on our forum page, and we would be discussing and really trying to maintain expectations, and really and again, not talking specifics, but like what our goals are. Now, our audience is big enough now. When we launched Don't Starve Together, we had, quite quickly, 1 million players going at it. So, any change that we make it can ruffle some feathers, and we still screw it up, right? So we had screwed it up just like a week ago before I came here. But we win some, we lose some in that sense that because we also have to be agile, we also have to be okay with screwing up sometimes. That's how we think about it. And as long as we learn from that and say, okay, we need to set the expectations better next time, and also, just cue it and have it so that our biggest fans can help, drive what the community is talking about. And there will always be dissenters, but as long as the majority of people understand what you're trying to do, they kind of get, I don't want to say pushed aside, but they don't get traction, right? And they don't get traction because I believe is because we are doing the right thing. We are actually doing it properly. Anyway, that's how we think about it.
Soren, with your project that you've just put out, how much of a solid plan do you have going forward in terms of making changes, making deliverables until you get towards the final product? And how much of it is, let's play it by ear? Can you talk about what you've got lined up?
Sure. So one of the first things we did after we launched on Steam is, we sat down, we had a big meeting all afternoon, basically listing out, okay, we got what we needed to, we hit the bar we needed to get on early access, because, you should definitely not just randomly decide today's the day you want to go up in early access, right? You have to figure out, what are all the elements of the game that are absolutely, necessary for someone to have, a reasonable experience, with the game. Maybe they will need to use their imagination here and there a bit, but, the game needs to be functioning. It needs to have a certain level of polish, and most importantly, the core element of fun needs to be there. Otherwise, you should not be on Steam at that point. So we listed all of those things, and it's like, okay, well, it looks like there's a solid year of work. And then what's awesome about early access is I think it really forces you to focus on the weakest part of your game, right? Like you can. It doesn't take long, to go through the forums to see the things that people are talking about, right? I mean, people, just for our game, people talk about the campaign a lot, and it's clear to me that I know that that's like a part of the game that needs a whole lot of work, right? So that's, on the other hand, people seem pretty happy with the AI. In fact, a lot of people find the game pretty difficult. So that's, I'm going to be focusing on the campaign and not on the AI, and then, we'll be, just reevaluating as we go. But it's great not to be guessing. That's to me the great thing about early access.
Yeah, Chris, can you talk about that as well? How do you process the information through your organization? How do you make sure that it filters down to the right people and it doesn't overwhelm people who should be left free to be more creative?
Well, we had a real challenge with that. I think one of the best pieces of advice was